Hey everybody, my name is Carol Beth Anderson. You can call me Beth. I'm an author and professional audiobook narrator, and this is video 3 of my Adobe Audition for Narrators video series. If you didn't catch videos 1 and 2, video 1 is all about setting up Adobe Audition, and video 2 is all about recording. You might want to watch those first. In video 3, we're going to cover a few different things. We're going to talk about proofing and recording pickups in your raw audio. If you're looking at how to record and then splice pickups into mastered, edited audio, we'll be covering that in a future video. But for now, we're going to talk about proofing and doing pickups in raw audio. We're also going to be talking about, let's see here, how and why to assign metadata to your files, and how to export your files as MP3s, including how to use batch process to export multiple files at once. Let's go ahead and get started. All right, we've got my Adobe Audition screen here. I did want to mention a couple of things I didn't mention in the intro. For one, I'm on a Mac. This may look different if you are on a PC. And also, I am a professional narrator. I'm not a professional audio engineer, so I'm teaching you the things that I've learned through the years, some things I've picked up from engineers online, and some I've just figured out myself or learned through videos, things like that. So I don't make any claims as to being a professional engineer, but from one amateur to another, I hope this is helpful to you. All right, first let's talk about proofing and doing proofing and pickups in raw audio. What I like to do is record my chapters for the day and then listen to them usually on that same day and do any pickups. I'm listening to them while I read the manuscript, just seeing if I messed anything up. And then I do any pickups right then and there in the raw audio files. Not everybody likes to proof this way. I like to do my own proofing that way, and that doesn't mean I don't send it to somebody else for proofing. Some people don't do their own proofing at all, but I just feel like I make enough little errors. I want to catch some of those on my own, and so I do a round of my own proofing before I have anybody else proof it for me. Excuse me. So here's how I do that. First of all, you can proof just with regular speed if you want to. So we would just go back to the beginning. I'm going to zoom this in by dragging here. There's lots of ways to zoom in and out. I talked about that a little bit. I think it was in the last video. All right, I'm going to zoom it in, and I can just go here and press the space bar to play. Chapter 1. You've heard the stories of fairy. Okay, so I could proof that way, or I like to proof at double speed. Just because it saves time for me. I know that I'm really careful when I'm doing my editing and mastering, so if there's anything funky with the sound, I'm generally going to catch it there. And I can read along quickly with my manuscript while I'm listening at double speed for proofing. Now, you may or may not want to do that, especially if you're first starting as a narrator. You might want to, there may be too much going on in your head as you're learning a lot of different things to proof at double speed. But if you want to try that, I'm going to go ahead and show you how I do it. So first of all, I can't change the speed when I'm in waveform view on Audition. See, I'm in waveform view up here. There's waveform and multitrack. The only way that I have found by looking it up myself, the only way I've found to change the speed is to go into what's called multitrack view on Audition. So to start a new multitrack file, I can go to File, New Multitrack Session, or you can also just do Command N or Control N if you are on a PC. So I'm going to give this a name. I could call it, this book was called Beauty and Deceit. That's why it says Bad. I could call it Bad Chapter 1 Proof, or I'm just going to put Multitrack. I'll do multitrack 1. I'm going to decide where to save that. In this case, I'm going to do it on my desktop. I normally wouldn't do that, but I'm saving certain things for these videos on my desktop. Just make sure you've got stuff backed up if you need to. I'm going to show you something else cool about having this multi-track open later. So for now, I'm just going to call it multi-track 1 and save it. All right, that brings me into multi-track view. There are different ways to go between multi-track and waveform view. You can click up here at the top, or you can just do number 1, and I believe that is one of the built-in keyboard shortcuts in Audition. I don't think I had to set that up myself. So 1, I'm clicking the 1 on my keyboard, and it's going back and forth. I want to be in multi-track view to be doing this double speed proofing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this file that's my raw chapter file, and I'm going to drag it over here just until I see it show up. And there we go. I've got it in the first track in the multi-track. The next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to go down here to where it says Properties. Now, if you don't have properties here, let me show you what you're going to do. Let's go ahead and I'm going to close that panel. I would go up here to Window, Properties. If it doesn't show up down here, it shows up somewhere else. Let's say it shows up here. I can drag it to where I want it. Here we go. I'm going to drag it down here because I like my Properties window to be down there. And I kind of like it to be over on this side. There we go. We're in Properties. And I'm going to go to where it says Stretch. You may have to open that. Stretch mode needs to be on real time. Real time. And then I'm going to stretch down here. I'm going to click on it, and I'm going to put in 50. What stretch does, and then I'm going to press enter or return. What stretch does is it takes normally what might have been, in this case, about a 15-minute chapter, and 50% means it's turning it into a 7.5-minute chapter. So it's easy to think, oh, I need it at 200% because I'm doubling the speed. No, you're actually halving the amount of time. So 50% refers to the length of time in the chapter. We're taking it from 15 minutes to 7.5 approximately, which means it is going at 50%, or I'm sorry, it's going at double speed. So 200% of what the speed would have been. I'm then going to either click this up here, the time selection tool, or I'm going to just click T on my keyboard. And then I'm going to click at the very beginning of this chapter, and let's go ahead and start listening.
Chapter 1. You've heard the stories of fairies in this forest.
So see, it's fast, but I can definitely still understand it well enough, and I would be reading along with my my manuscript. So let's pretend that we find a mistake.
I'm holding the most beautiful hat I've ever made.
Okay, let's pretend that that was supposed to say I'm holding the most lovely hat I've ever made, not the most beautiful hat I've ever made. By the way, if you hear squeaks, I've got to replace my stool in here. It's really squeaky, and so if you hear that, that's what's going on. So what I would do is I would go back to the beginning of that, and then I would click 1 or click waveform up here, and hopefully it puts the cursor in the right place.
I'm holding the most...
It does. Wonderful. Because we need to do our pickups within waveform because our multi-track, the speed is all messed up. So we're going to do our pickups in waveform. If it doesn't put it in the right place, sometimes it gets a little weird and it won't put, excuse me, I'm kind of froggy again today. Sometimes it won't put your cursor at the right place. Or your playhead is actually what it's called. So if it doesn't, like I could go back to multi-track and I would see, okay, we're at like 4 seconds, so I need to be at about 8 seconds in the waveform view. So there's 8 seconds. All right. I'm just zooming out a bit. I'm using my trackpad for that, but there's all sorts of ways to do that. You could use the plus and minus keys for zooming in and out, or you can drag this up here. And I'm going to go ahead and start at the end of the previous phrase, and I'm going to highlight all the way to the end of the phrase that I am replacing, including like the breath afterwards. That gives me some extra time at the beginning and end to just kind of some extra cushion time. So let me listen to that again.
I'm holding the most beautiful hat I've ever made.
Okay, we're pretending that that was supposed to be I'm holding the most lovely hat I've ever made. So we're just going to use our normal Z, which is our record button. Remember, we are set up, I'm right-clicking here, we're set up in punch and roll mode on overwrite. That's what we want there. And I'm going to go ahead and redo this.
Stories of fairies in this forest.
I'm holding the most lovely hat I've ever made.
Thick wool.
Now, when I did that, there's like only a tiny little half breath afterwards. I'm going to undo it. Command Z. By the way, my air conditioning is on, so we've got a little bit of white noise here that we wouldn't normally have because I would normally turn it off for recording. And I'm going to redo that, starting a little bit earlier.
Stories of fairies in this forest.
I'm holding the most lovely hat I've ever made.
Thick wool.
Okay, that's pretty good. Now, because I'm doing this on a different day, my voice is different, it is going to sound a little different. This is why I like to do pickups on the same day that I've recorded the chapter. And normally I might go back and re-record it over and over if I need to make it really match as well as I can. But for now, we're just going to say that that is enough. Now, let's say that I actually missed. First of all, let's listen to that.
Stories of fairies in this forest.
I'm holding the most lovely hat I've ever made. Yeah, see, it's quieter and everything. Don't worry about that. If I was doing it on the same day, it would match better. All right, I'm going to undo that. Let's say that I actually missed an entire sentence. It was supposed to say, I'm holding
Beautiful hat I've ever made.
the most beautiful hat I've ever made. It's so soft. Let's say I missed that sentence. It's so soft. Well, I can't just overwrite. I need to actually insert there. So I'm going to put my cursor right here after this previous sentence. If you do what's called scrubbing, where you're dragging this, you can kind of hear when you get to silence. Oh, right there is good. I can even zoom in a little bit, get it to just the right place before that breath starts. That's a breath right there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to right-click. I'm going to switch from overwrite to insert. Still punch and roll, but from overwrite to insert. Now, by the way, I think I taught you this in the last video. I should really be reading along with at least part of my pre-roll, so I'm going to do that this time.
Most beautiful hat I've ever made.
It's so soft. And I'm stopping that recording by clicking the space key. All right.
Hat I've ever made. It's so soft.
All right, I might go ahead and just get rid of this little extra place before that breath. Highlight it, delete it.
Most beautiful hat I've ever made. It's so soft. Thick wool.
Okay, again, I've actually changed my mic setup a little bit since I recorded this. So I would need to make sure it really sounded the same. My voice was a little higher. I might need to move closer to the mic like I was when I recorded this. So I would need to make sure it really matched. That doesn't match perfectly. That's okay. You get the idea of what to do if you have to insert something instead of recording over it. I'm going to go ahead and change this back to overwrite, just so I don't forget to later. And I'm going to undo because this is an actual raw file of mine that I don't want that extra line in. All right, that's it. That is how, well, and let me show you what we would do when we finished that. While it's playing, I'm going to press 1 to go back to multitrack.
Made.
Okay, if I do it while it's playing, it will usually take me back to the proper place in the multitrack. Sometimes otherwise it doesn't. So I go ahead and switch back to multitrack while it's playing. It stops playing, and then I would keep on going and listening at double speed.
I'm holding the most beautiful hat I've ever made. Thick wool, flawlessly knitted. It's mostly cream-colored, but I used a little of my precious green-dyed yarn.
Actually, it didn't even go back to the right place, but that's okay. It went back right before it. That's fine. Again, sometimes you get kind of weird with where the playhead is, and you just have to get it to the right spot. But that's how we do it at double speed. And again, we're going back and forth because you have to do your recording at the regular speed in waveform. If you don't want to do double speed, just get rid of all of that part that I showed you, and all you're doing is
for a single row of pine,
listening right here, stopping when you need to, and putting in any pickups when you need to. All right, that was pretty simple. Let's talk next about, let's say that we've got a file that is fully recorded. The next thing I want to show you how to do is to change the metadata on the file. Metadata is just some digital data that goes along with the audio file, and it's actually text data. And you may or may not care about putting metadata in. Let me tell you the reason I do. If I ever record something and I later want to say, maybe I want to listen to the entire audiobook on iTunes, or maybe I have a friend who's going to listen to it for me to proof it, or I just want to send it to them before I actually publish it. And I'm like, hey, here's a Dropbox folder with all of the chapters. Metadata is awesome because if you import it into a program like iTunes or another program that you can use for music, if your metadata is correct, it'll keep all the chapters in the right order, and it can even put them all into an album for you because we give it an album name, and all the chapters are in the same album. So let me show you how to do metadata. It's just kind of one of those extras I like to do if I'm recording for clients. Most of them don't even know that I'm doing this, but if they ever run into a time when that metadata needs to be there, it will be, and maybe they'll appreciate it, or at the very least, they won't be frustrated by the lack of it. So metadata is in radio production over here. I'm going to click that. You can also get to metadata by just going to metadata right here by clicking that. But radio production is probably up here on your screen already, so that's where I go. I would name this Chapter 1. If I wanted to, I could go ahead and give it the full name, which in this case is You've Heard the Stories of Fairies in This Forest. I would put Chapter 1, then that full name. I actually didn't do that for this book. I just did Chapter 1, Chapter 2, etc. For a client, I do go ahead and put in the full title of the chapter. I just didn't really need to for this one. Artist, I always put the author's name. If that's not me, in this case, this was one of my books. If that's not me, I put in the author's name, but I'll go ahead and put my name, Carol Beth Anderson. So again, artist is really not the narrator's name. It's your name. It's the author's name, not the narrator's name. And album, I would give the title of the book. So Beauty and Deceit. Now track number, here's where we get tricky. This is not track number 1. In my case, I have opening credits, that's track 1. And then I have a dedication, that's track 2. And then I have a prologue, which is track 3. So for this book, Chapter 1 is actually track 4. And that's going to vary according to which project you're doing. But I know that Chapter 1 is track 4, Chapter 20 is track 23. I always add 3 to it for this book. And then I can go back to default, get rid of this big radio production screen. I would save it. And there we go. We've got our metadata done. And that will stick with your file even when you're doing editing and mastering. And even when you export it to MP3, the metadata can stick around. And that's actually what we're going to talk about next, is exporting. Let me take a drink first. All right. There's a reason we're talking about exporting right now. If for some reason you record something that's just raw audio and you need to export it to MP3 as raw audio, I want you to know how to do that. Now, let me tell you, usually you're not going to be exporting MP3 to raw audio. Usually, if you are sending your files to an audio engineer or a producer or a publisher, they're probably going to want your WAV files because those are lossless files that are not compressed in any way. So usually you're going to send raw WAV files to other people. However, you might have a reason. For example, you might be recording an audition piece for a publisher who doesn't expect edited, mastered auditions. A lot of the big publishers don't even necessarily want you to do edited mastered auditions. They might prefer to hear your raw audio. And so, but an MP3 file is a lot smaller. And they may, for instance, let's say you're doing an audition on the Ahab website. They have a limit as to file size. Sometimes you need an MP3 file because it's smaller than a WAV file. So sometimes you might need to take a raw file and export it to MP3. That's why I'm going over export so early in this series. I just want to make sure you know how to do it when you need to do it. So there's two ways to export our file. First of all, we can go up to File, Export, and then we would click File. Let me show you what these different settings mean. And this is when you're exporting just one file. First of all, it gives the file, it puts a 01 at the end of it. There may be a way to change that setting. I don't know. I always take it off because I don't really want that 01 there. It's going to be a different file type, so it's not going to overwrite the WAV file anyways. And then we would go ahead and browse for where we want to put it. I'm just putting this one on the desktop. Save. And then let me show you these different settings below that. Format, make sure you're in MP3. Sample type, this is important. This is what you need for audiobooks. We're going to do 44/100 as your sample rate. Bit depth, 32. I'm trying to remember. I think maybe you can do less than that, but I always do 32. I can't remember for sure on that one. Advanced, you don't need to change anything there. That 44/100 is really important, though. And then my stomach is growling, excuse me. Format settings. This is also really important. You need constant bit rate, okay? Constant, not variable. Bit rate, I actually usually change that to 256 or even 320, just because it's going to be a slightly higher quality file. However, if you're having trouble getting your file down to a size it particularly needs to be, you might go to 192. Don't go any lower than 192. 192 is usually the minimum that they want for audiobook files. I'm going to go ahead and switch this to 256. Click OK. And we want to make sure it says include markers and other metadata. Okay? That's how you make sure that metadata you just put in there sticks with the MP3 file. And we're going to say OK. It's exporting it. It'll take a few seconds. There we go. All right, that's how you export one file. Let me show you how you'd export more than one. I'm going to open another file. Let's just do chapter 55. All right, let's say we wanted to export both of these. I'm going to highlight them both over here. So I'm going to click the first one. I'm going to click Command or Control and click the other file I want to do. You might even have 20, 30, 50 files open that you're exporting the entire book to MP3 all at once. We're going to go down here and go to Batch Process. If you don't have that, again, go to Window, open it up, move it to where you want it to be on the screen. Batch Process. I'm going to just drag these down into this open space here. There's a few settings we need to check. First of all, make sure where it says Favorite, make sure None is selected. Favorites are different things you can do to the audio, and we want to make sure it's not that you're not making any changes to the audio, like mastering it or something, when you are exporting it. And then we're going to make sure that the export box is checked down here, and then we'll go to Export Settings. I never change anything up here. I never add anything to it. You can if you want to. We're going to change the location. Again, desktop for me. And we're going to do all those same settings I just told you. I'll just go over them real quickly. MP3 audio, 44/100 hertz, mono. Make sure it's on mono. I think I may have forgotten to say that before. Source bit depth. It just means whatever your bit depth was for your WAV is what it is now. You can change that if you need to. And then we go to sample type. I think that's all here too. And then, oh, actually, you know what? This is having me do 16, maybe 16-bit is the minimum. I don't know. I've done it both of these ways and we're good. So, all right, I just took a minute to look at the ACX requirements, and it doesn't even say how many bits it needs to be. I believe you can do 16 or 32. All right, format settings, we've got it at 256. ACX actually says it's a negligible difference between 192 and 256, and it probably is, but I still like to have stuff at a higher quality if I can. So, and then we got to check these different things. Do we want to remove files from this panel here upon completion? Yeah, then I don't have to delete them from the batch processing place. Do we want to close files upon completion? I usually do because I'm usually done with them when I'm exporting, but if you're still going to be using them for something, make sure that that is unchecked. I'm actually going to uncheck it right now because I want to show you something right after this. And then include markers and other metadata. Yes. I'm going to say OK. And then we have to go down here and click Run. It's working. And now let's go to the desktop. We've got both of these MP3 files right where we told him to go, and it did it all at once, which is really cool. By the way, a minute ago, I told you that I was keeping these files open for something, and I realized the thing I was going to show you was something I've already talked to you about. I didn't have any reason to keep those files open, so just disregard that. And I think that's all you need to know today, that we went over how to proof and do pickups in raw audio, how and why to assign metadata to your file, and how to export individual files or do a batch process to export multiple files all at once. Hope that was helpful. Video 4 will be a mastering video, and it's going to be mastering 1. We're going to have multiple mastering videos, but that's going to be the first one, and I think it's going to be a really helpful one for those of you who like to do your own mastering. Have a great day, a great week, a great whatever.